So we're going to do something called multi-draft reading. I'm going to try to do all three in one shot. So the first one is marking confusion. So we're just looking for the questions we have as we read so that we can try to find answers to them. Sometimes those answers are going to be in the article itself. Sometimes we're going to have to look up a word in a dictionary. Sometimes we're going to have to, go and do some research online. It kind of varies. So the next administration must recognize that not only that climate change is a real problem, but we also are not on a course to solve it. So I'm kind of curious what's in our way. What's the problem? Now that might be a question that gets answered by the article. It might not be. The next president needs the courage to discard our feel-good but ineffective solutions. What solutions specifically are they talking about getting rid of? Ending our reliance on fossil fuels that have powered 2 centuries of economic growth will require an energy revolution. So what does he mean by energy revolution? Is that we need to cut back on energy? Is that we need to have new technologies? There are various ways of doing that. And I'm curious which one he means, because I'm betting that that's going to relate to his claim. Many policies focus on solving global warming by investing in solar and wind. So far I'm okay. But over the next quarter century, these technologies will contribute only marginally to the solution. Moreover, they are not competitive now, nor will they now, and they will be mostly inefficient for at least 25 years. So I'm curious what he means by marginally. Is that 10%? Is that 1%? Is that 5%? If it's 10%, that means a lot more to me, or a lot less to me in this case, than if it's 5 or 1. What does he mean by they're not competitive? Not competitive with what? What are our standards for being competitive? This is the last one I'm going to do. The International Energy Agency estimates that 0.5% of the world's energy comes from solar and wind. Okay, who are these people? Do they have an agenda? I've never heard of this agency necessarily. Can't recall. So I probably want to know if they have an agenda. They estimate 0.5% of the world's energy comes from solar and wind. I want to know how much that is. That might be more than you think, because that's the entire world. Even with the Paris Agreement, I'm curious what did the Paris Agreement, I know what that is, but what did the Paris Agreement do for this? So how did the Paris Agreement affect solar and wind? This will increase to only 2.4% by 2040. So it seems to me that the Paris Agreement must have done something to increase solar and wind energy. But I'm going to ask that question just in case. The IEA also estimates that the world is spending about 90 billion. Again, this is the world, so who in the world? 90 billion in the world doesn't sound like as much as this might otherwise feel. So is that 90 billion one country? Is that 90 billion 90 billion countries? Because suddenly that seems like a lot less. There probably aren't actually 90 billion countries now that I think about it. And even by 2040, they will still need about the same support. That is not sustainable. Okay, so that's my first read. The second time I read through it, I want to get kind of a better understanding. Now, I will have read the entire article. I've done that before, magic of TV and all that. But the next time, I want to try and summarize, otherwise known as gist statements. So I'm just going to try to figure out what each paragraph is about in a really short form. So, the next administration must recognize not only that climate change is a real problem, but we are not on course to solve it. The next president needs the courage to discard our current feel-good solutions, feel-good but ineffective solutions. Now, I want to do this in as few words as possible because I want to filter. So I've got a couple choices. If I'm looking at this, I've got a couple potential subjects. I'm either talking about the administration, or I'm talking about the president, or I'm talking about some combination of both. So maybe I'm going to say government, because that will cover the administration and the president. Well, what's government need to do? Well, it says here, recognize that climate change is real. We are not on course to solve it. Discard our current feel-good solutions. Well, again, I want to kind of put that all together. So, the government needs to find more effective more effective climate change solutions. That encompasses all those elements, so this seems like a pretty solid one. Ending our reliance on fossil fuels that have powered our economic growth will require an energy revolution. So the subject here is, to me, well, I'm going to go to my verb first. Ending our reliance on fossil fuels seems to be kind of what's going on. And then it requires an energy revolution. So I can kind of leave it like that. So maybe I'm just going to put ending reliance on fossil fuels needs energy revolution. Done. Next one. Many policies focus on solving global warming by investing in solar and wind. But over the next quarter century, these technologies only contribute marginally to the solution. Moreover, they are not competitive and be mostly inefficient for the next 25 years. Well, it could be policies, but that's really talking about global warming. Most of the paragraph is talking about solar and wind. So that seems like that should be my subject. So what about solar and wind? They only contribute marginally to the solution, and they're not competitive. So I want to figure out a way to kind of put that together. I'm just going to say they're not good solutions. I don't need to go into more detail than that, because when I'm looking for evidence, I can look at that paragraph knowing, hey, look, this is the paragraph about solar and wind's not good solutions. The International Energy Agency estimates 0.5% of the world's energy comes from solar and wind, and even with the Paris agreements, that will increase to 2.4% by 2004. The IEA also estimates the world is spending about $90 billion on solar and wind subsidies this year, and even by 2040, they will still need the same support. That's not sustainable. It might seem like I'm talking about the IEA, but I'm really not. I'm talking again about solar and wind. So I'm going to say solar and wind. And what it tells me is that they don't produce a lot of electricity and they cost a lot. So I'm going to say, really, maybe they're inefficient. Maybe that's a good way to say it. I'm going to say inefficient. You're going to watch me misspell inefficient. It'll be great. Yeah, that's fine. Told you I was going to misspell it. Okay, that brings us to our third and final read. Okay, you may end up doing more reads than this, but in this case, the third and final read, with informational text, I might just look for kind of good piece of evidence in my last one. For this kind of text, I'm going to look for subjective statements. So a subjective statement is a statement that kind of gives me what the author's opinion is. So anything I see that gives me the idea of the author's opinion, tells me what side they're on, I'm just going to circle. So I'm going through it again. I'm actually feeling pretty good about this article now. I can read most of the paragraphs without screwing them up. Watch me screw them up now. The next administration must recognize, okay, so this tells me something about their position, must recognize that climate change is real. Okay, they obviously are climate change proponents. They believe in climate change. But also, we are not on course to solve it. We are not on course. This is not a fact. This is the author's opinion. Not on course tells me that. The next president needs, this tells me it's his opinion, to discard the current feel-good solutions. Now, he's saying that these solutions are feel-good but ineffective. Again, that tells me his opinion. Courage to discard. If it was an obvious thing, he wouldn't need courage to discard it. So again, it tells me his opinion. Ending our reliance on fossil fuels that have powered 2 centuries. So he wants us to end our reliance. That tells me an opinion. Will require economic growth will require an energy revolution. So that tells me his opinion. Many policies focus on global warming by investing in global warming, but over the quarter century, these technologies will contribute only marginally to the solution. He could have used a different word than marginally, but marginally tells me his opinion. Moreover, they are not competitive. That tells me an opinion. He hasn't shown me they're not competitive. He hasn't given me facts about that. And will be mostly inefficient. Now, he's not telling me it is inefficient. He's saying it's mostly inefficient. So even using that word inefficient, I should have looked there to spell it, with that mostly, tells me something. The IEA estimates that just 0.5% of the world's energy comes from solar and wind. And even with this, even with tells me that, well, it's bad, because even with, got it, it will increase to only 2.4% by 2040. The IEA also estimates the world is spending about $90 billion with wind and subsidies. Even by 2040, they will still need about the same support. That's not sustainable. Again, this is a subjective point of view. The IEA numbers are objective. They're facts. They are what the IEA actually found. But the statements of even with and that's not sustainable, those are subjective. So that gives you an idea of what my first 3 readings are going to look like. And it's just a way of really getting a good understanding of the article. Because if you don't have this understanding of the article, it's going to be really hard for you to do any of the next steps.